Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Mike Mulqueen, Director at Manhattan Associates. And today we're going to talk about hitting the reset button on transportation management systems. Now, for the past few months here on Talking Logistics, I've been talking about and writing about the main challenge that logistics professionals face today, which is keeping pace with the rapid changes that are happening in the industry. And certainly one of those areas, one of those business processes that's undergoing ongoing changes is transportation. So that begs the question, considering all the changes that are taking place in transportation today, do we need to rethink or relook at what a transportation management is and what it does? And I think that's really going to be the core of our conversation today with Mike. And I've known Mike for many, many years, and he's one of the sharpest minds I know on transportation management and transportation management systems. So I certainly look forward to getting his thoughts and perspective on this topic. Just a reminder before we get started, part of our goal here is to make this conversation interactive. So if you do have a question or a comment for Mike, you can go ahead and post that via the question button or via the chat, and I'll take a look at that. And certainly if we've got time and it's a good and appropriate question, I'll go ahead and weave that into the conversation. If you are joining us as a visitor, you will have to log in first, sign up first in order to be able to ask a question. So with that, Mike, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Adrian. Glad to be here.
So Mike, before we kind of get started and really explore this topic further, why don't you tell us, just to provide some context, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with logistics, and kind of what your current role and responsibilities are at Manhattan Associates.
Sure, Adrian. So I now am over 25 years doing transportation systems work. I started with UPS Logistics Technologies in 1989, primarily working on fleet routing and scheduling, and also a mobile application that we sold commercially. Was with Logistics for about 9 years doing product management for their transportation management system. Was with Accenture, where my primary client was the U.S. Postal Service, working on different transportation initiatives for them. So you can see a theme. I've been a transportation logistics guy ever since 1989, either implementing TMS systems or managing those systems.
And you're also
in terms of
yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say
I'm sorry,
you're
Adrian.
a graduate of MIT in their logistics program.
Sure, yeah, a wonderful program, the Masters of Engineering program at MIT, a wonderful program. And today I'm the Senior Director of Product Management at Manhattan Associates. So what a product manager really needs to do is we analyze the market, we understand where the market's going, and then we have development resources that we put to task to build out innovative capabilities that add value to our customers. From my perspective as a long-term product manager, I believe that we're successful when we make our customers successful. If I can make my TMS customers successful, I'm going to be able to sell software. I'm going to be able to market my solutions better. And right now, I don't think that there's a better time ever to be in TMS right now, just because of the eye that it's getting from senior leadership.
Yeah, excellent point. And like I said, there's so much going on in transportation today that I've always been a big proponent of TMS, as you know, and I think the demand for it has always been strong. But you could certainly make a case that it's stronger than ever today. So with that, let's start with what's happening in transportation today to kind of put this into context, if you will, the whole discussion around a TMS and what it needs to do. You had the opportunity to work with a lot of shippers, a lot of carriers in kind of your role. What challenges are shippers and carriers, facing today that might be different or new compared to, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, and I kind of lump the challenges in the cyclical and non-cyclical challenges. So the cyclical challenges that we see, every transportation discussion here in the States talks about capacity, right? So the expectation, and I've been a chicken little, I've been yelling capacity since 2010, and honestly, freight rates, which are really going to be the arbiter of whether there really truly is a capacity issue, have not really increased. Last year they were extremely flat. This year the expectation is that we will start seeing some bump ups, some 3 to 5% increases. But But I watch a lot of the bids that we do as a company. So our company does a lot of bids for some major shippers, and we're still seeing pretty good savings, which leads me to believe that the capacity issues still are not as tight as we expect them to be. They will happen. There's too many factors that are going to hit the supply demand and favor the carriers. And again, I think the capacity issues that we're running into are primarily on long haul truckload. Right, they're not in the private fleets, they're not in the domicile based or the regional fleets, they're really on the long haul truckload side, and that's where there's some opportunities. So we're seeing with that capacity surge that or the capacity issues that we're expecting to have, we're seeing more movements towards dedicated to lock in that capacity, right? And not dedicated in the domiciled environment, but long haul dedicated. A lot harder to manage than the domicile based, but if you really want to lock in your capacity, that's the way to do it. Intermodal. We've seen steady growth in intermodal, and intermodal service is becoming a lot more reliable and certainly cost effective. And one other piece that we've been really championing, because again, we sell both to carriers as well as shippers, is carrier friendly operations. I enjoy reading trucking blogs. So having the truck drivers, write, in their own interesting way, the challenges they run into with shippers, right? Truckers get paid per mile, and poor operations within the yard certainly impacts their payment. Being treated without respect certainly impacts their retention. And we're looking at, on the long haul side, attrition rates of close to 100%. So I think that a lot of these things are coming into play in terms of impacting TL capacity. Again, like I said, I don't think we're seeing the full brunt of it yet. But I think more than ever this year, I'm starting to hear my shippers talk about, it's a little bit difficult right now to get freight. Another cyclical issue is certainly fuel. And 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, extreme volatility in diesel prices. We have not seen any volatility in diesel prices over the last few years. They've really been limited to between $3.85 and $4 a gallon. But that's a real high price. At $4 a gallon, fuel becomes about the biggest expense that a trucking company is going to have, even over labor. So with this high price of fuel, I think people are starting to look at alternatives. I think that natural gas, CNG, and LNG, I think that these are real opportunities for fleets. We're seeing it on the regional fleets right now, just because the infrastructure is not there for refueling while en route. But that's growing as well. You see, constantly see updates from Pilot and Love and all the different truck stops that are starting to talk about natural gas. And the economics of it, I think, are going to play out long term, especially with the 3 years of no volatility in diesel. It's almost unprecedented. You have to go back to the 90s to see anything like that. I expect a surge, and I think that that's going to be a tipping point for more people to start investing in the natural gas vehicles. And we're starting to see, one of the big complaints was always the horsepower, and we're starting to see organizations like Cummins come out with their 12-liter engines that they operate just like the big diesel trucks the big Class 8 trucks that we have now. So those are the cyclical type things, and these are things the transportation professionals, they've always been able to deal with. They've been able to kind of go back and forth, and sometimes it's a capacity shortage, and sometimes it's a surplus, and sometimes diesel prices are high, and sometimes that they're low. But these are things that transportation professionals are good at dealing with. The non-cyclical things, I think, are the things that are making transportation and logistics a little bit more interesting, and it's essentially the omni-channel revolution. All of a sudden, organizations that never had a need to have a core competency in parcel now have to be able to do parcel. Reverse logistics is extremely important. Home delivery using a courier network, or in some instances, private fleets for same day. These are real new challenges. It used to be the network was supplier to manufacturer to distribution center to store or customer. Now all of a sudden, I got to deal with potentially 300 million customers just in the United States alone, right? And transportation is such an important piece of that product that people are buying. And that delivery service, the ability to differentiate based on delivery services, these are really going to separate, from our perspective, the winners and losers in the retail revolution.
You raised. I love the way you kind of contrasted it too, because yes, whenever we have any kind of conversation around transportation, right, it's about fuel, it's about capacity, it's about driver shortage, right. So it's those usual suspects, if you will, that always dominate the conversation. Those remain key concerns and things that transportation managers have to deal with. But you're right. I mean, I think things like omni-channel, same-day delivery, local delivery. These are things that are now, for a lot of companies, they're venturing into new territory in these areas. And what I hear a lot of is that we don't have that know-how in-house to know how to do that. We've never done this before. So not only are they looking for kind of the technology capabilities to be able to enable some of these business processes, they're also looking for best practices or ideas or advice on, okay, we don't want to make, there are obviously companies that have done parcel for many, many years. What can we learn from them, right? So we don't make the same rookie mistakes, that maybe they did, right? So I think it's a very, very, interesting, time and interesting set of challenges that logistics professionals have to, manage. So let's take that as now the foundation, right? When you take these current challenges into consideration, as well as future ones, right, that we may or may not be able to even predict in terms of what's going to happen, 5 or 10 years down the road, for sure. So what capabilities must a TMS have today that maybe weren't as important or weren't as or even needed, just a few years ago? I guess, so put it differently, and to put it kind of in the context of the topic is, do we need to hit the reset button on TMS? And if so, why and in what ways?
I think we do, Adrian. The part of the challenges of omnichannel is, when I go out and I talk with our retailers and I talk with our grocers that are being challenged, specifically, they are very concerned about Amazon right now. And when I look at them, they believe that they can execute. They believe that they can make their omni-channel work. What they're very, very concerned about, and I think you touched on this in terms of best practices, is the ability to do this profitably. There are so many dead carcasses of organizations trying to get into, WebDAN, right? The poster child of a wonderful idea that they just could not execute profitably. And I think that is one of the biggest concerns. And I think a lot of it goes back to the systems that are in place today were not designed for omnichannel. They were designed for that traditional network of suppliers going to distribution centers, going to potentially forward DCs, going to customer stores. That was the network that they were designed for. They were not designed to support the omni-channel realities that we're seeing right now. And again, I was actually part of this, right? So 25 years, Adrian, you were part of this as well. We just saw a proliferation. This is a huge industry just in the United States. Logistics in the United States is $1.3 trillion a year, right? So ultimately what you end up is you get a cottage industry of supply chain providers that are out there. Some of them just focusing on yard management, some of them focused on warehouse management, some of them focused on TMS, international visibility, connectivity, routing and scheduling, dispatch. There is a whole list. When I was at Modex last week, there was a whole convention center of providers out there, each providing a different point solution. That's not going to get people where they need to go, right? Those point solutions oftentimes have a great deal of depth within the process that they're supporting, but what they don't have the ability to do is be cognizant of upstream and downstream processes. So they make what we call myopic or greedy decisions. So that's one of the things that we work at here at Manhattan, is to try to create not necessarily just a pure TMS. I think TMS, the reset TMS is almost in need of a name change as well. A siloed TMS system is going to naturally be suboptimal. Well, what we're really positioning here is an evolution of TMS into logistics. And that's really the combination of all of those different transportation components that I just talked about, but also working well with other supply chain execution solutions like warehouse management, yard management. So, from my perspective, just in the transportation realm, being able to handle rail, international, fleet is a completely different problem than contract, just from an optimization perspective, the way that we go about and solve those types of problems. All of those under a single umbrella. I want to be able to see all of my transportation in this system, regardless of origin, destination, size, mode, anything. The next big piece that we have really been focusing on and investing a lot of dollars into is transportation modeling. An organization that cannot do transportation modeling is going to be at a fundamental disadvantage. The ability to go in and I always talk about challenging your transportation policy. What if we do things differently? What if instead of delivering to my stores once a week, I deliver to my stores twice a week? What if I offer my stores a 2-hour time window instead of a 4-hour time window? But do I have the right mix of prepaid and collect freight on the inbound side? TMS systems are not designed to answer those types of problems. They're executional systems. They're order-taking systems. An order comes in, and based on the constraints and the rates and the capacity I have in my fleet and the different modes that I have, I'm going to come up with the best cost solution. But I can't change order dates. I can't change anything about the base criteria that's kind of codified within my TMS system. I can't change those things. What if modeling is the key to enable an organization to change those things? So that's an area that we have a lot of interest in, and we're spending a lot of time from an R&D perspective in building out capabilities that we're going to deliver to the market. That again, we want our customers to be able to constantly challenge, continuously improve. Networks are changing. Omni-channel is changing things. We're seeing a drastic reduction in retail space, right? No new malls have been developed in the last 10 years, right? Retail is changing. And are my clients' networks changing to meet those challenges? Another big thing that we're seeing, TMS systems when I first started, they were very closed systems. They did not have visibility into external data, benchmark information, CSA scores, carrier insurance information. So the ability for a TMS system to be able to aggregate all of this information and then use this during planning, during what-if modeling, taking all this into account is going to be key for next generation TMSs. Another area, so those are kind of the functional areas, and again, I kind of break it down into functional and technical. From a technical perspective, Adrian, nobody has any patience at all for enterprise application usability. We saw this with recently with SAP and Avon, and Avon attempted to roll out to the Avon sales reps, which are typically kind of housewives, the SAP S&D application, and it was completely not accepted. Right? People do not want, especially the younger generation. It was one thing in 1995 to have a cumbersome application. It's not acceptable in 2014. So we always strive. Everything is around application elegance, ease of use, and the intuitive nature of the application. And ultimately, what this drives is better change management. One of the two biggest hindrances to TMS implementation are integration and change management. And through a nice UX that's intuitive, easy to use, doesn't require a lot of training, that people can figure out advanced capabilities, that's where the market is going. Along with that, open architecture, the ability for both internal and external stakeholders to get access to rate information, shipment status information without being trained on the application. That's very critical. And finally, in the TMS world especially, Adrian, and you've been the biggest proponent of this since I've known you. Probably 2002, you were talking about SaaS. And TMS is just a natural SaaS application. There's just, aside from just the cost of ownership, which is significant for on-premise, SaaS enables network connectivity, potentially collaboration across shippers, right? So the ability to commingle freight. Now, these are items that technologically we probably can solve. We always run into issues in practice during the implementation, but the ability to co-manage freight, the ability to create multi-shipper continuous moves, all of those things really require kind of a single SaaS instance. Now, some shippers that we deal with, some multi-billion-dollar shippers, they still want on-premise or single-tenant hosted, and we offer all kinds of flavors. But we really do see SaaS offering some critical advantages in terms of the things I talked about, big data, analytics that we would lose visibility to in another type of deployment model.
Yeah, all great points. I mean, I think the ability to do the transportation modeling that you talked about earlier, with the what if analysis. I mean, it used to be that any kind of tactical or strategic analysis would take place. Maybe at best maybe once a year. A lot of companies we used to do that once every 2 or 3 years. And obviously, in this environment, having the ability to run those scenarios and do that kind of modeling on a more frequent basis. And so one of the points you just made now as well in terms of usability, in terms of being able to do that in an easy to learn, easy to use model, is critical as well. And yes, I've been a big time proponent of software as a service for transportation and other supply chain processes that are inherently network centric, and obviously transportation is a great example of that. A lot of times when people talk about transportation management systems, right, there's the execution side of things, the ability to tender, the visibility, the freight, the payment side of things. But then there's also the optimization side of things, and optimization you can quickly go down into a very techie type of discussion. So I don't want to go down the fully techie route, but at a high level, when we look at optimization and the TMS optimization, what needs to change? What needs to be different? What new capabilities do companies need? Obviously, the what if capabilities, the modeling capabilities, are one example there, I guess. But what new optimization capabilities do companies need in this new environment?
Yeah, this is something near and dear to my heart. I think that part of the problem with a lot of the optimization out there is it's been too theoretical. So we'll have very smart operations research people build out algorithms that come up with least cost solutions, but oftentimes I call it, they're making binary decisions, right? So that there's no gray area. So if I am 1 minute late for a delivery, I can't make that delivery. In fact, you can make that delivery, right? There was a lot of assumptions that were made into that calculation that I was going to be 1 minute late. So the ability or the movement really from this very deterministic binary means to do optimization. And if you think about it, Adrian, where we were really at just a few years ago was everything was batch. Right? Transportation never starts and never ends. It is a continuous flow, right? There are certain aspects. Fleet routing may have a cutoff time at 5 o'clock, and I can actually do batch. But for the most part, transportation is a continuous process. So what we have seen is we've seen a move from batch optimization to more continuous optimization. And the next big thing I see is predictive optimization. If you go talk with a transportation planner or a dispatcher, they will know what is likely to occur. TMS systems don't know what's going to occur unless I have an order or some means to tell my TMS system what's likely to occur. So the ability now to start taking into account probabilities. The probability of X occurring is this. That means I would actually send my fleet out to this location because, again, in this example here, perhaps the probability was of a backhaul arising in a certain geographic area. Again, we have a lot of experience in this area with our carrier solutions, right? Because that's long-haul carriers, that they're going to dispatch a truck to a certain area before the subsequent load even arises, right? So our ability to understand that and take into account this probabilistic nature of transportation is, for me, one of the big next areas that optimization needs to deal with. And then the last piece is, and we talked about modeling a little bit. I had to do a lot of modeling back in the day of consulting, and one of the issues I always ran into, Adrian, was the concept of tell me what the average is. So I'm going to do a model, and I'm going to ask for average order quantities, or average transit times, or average diesel prices, whatever it might be. Averages are wonderful. They typically, you can explain to the CEO that the methodology that you used as you were building out your model, but they don't take into account variability. So essentially, at MIT they call this resiliency of the plan. How resilient is the plan, right? How well does it hold up to normal forecastable variability? And I always use the example of sometimes a customer may order 3 pallets, sometimes they may order 20 pallets. They never order half of 23, right? Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 20. If you're taking the average, you're going to make incorrect assumptions. So part of what we're doing in our modeling piece is we do a great deal of statistical analysis. We understand the distribution type. Is the quantities that we're using, are they normally distributed? Are they uniformly distributed? What's the standard deviation? And then we use simulation on top of our optimization. So we'll optimize to come up with a plan, and then we'll simulate that. Over a year, this is what my network is probably going to look like. How well did my plan hold up to this known variability? And I think without taking into account that variability, that component in terms of modeling, you're going to get very fragile plans. You're going to get plans that work on the day that everybody is average, but that day never really occurs. we never have an average day. We have a white paper on that. There's never an average day. So I think that that's, again, one of the other things that we're building out is this stochastic concept around modeling, this probabilistic concept around modeling, as well as even on the daily execution side. So a lot of advancements on optimization. We have some of the smartest people in the industry working on our solutions, because optimization is oftentimes where the ROI is generated, right? So we spend a lot of time and effort in attempting to get this right. And as transportation costs, as labor costs, as all these different costs have risen pretty dramatically over the last decade, there's a much bigger delta between the winners and losers, between the guys that do this really, really well and the guys that don't.
Yeah, I mean, when you talked about, variability there, and, really taking a look at different mathematical approaches, to optimization. I think that is, my key takeaway, I guess, at the 30,000-foot level, is that you really have to, look at the math differently. You have to take a broader a set of, depending on the different nature of your supply chains, different mathematical approaches make more sense than others, and really having the ability to address the broad spectrum of what is actually happening in your supply chain, I think is an important piece of that. We're kind of have time probably for just a few more questions here. So before I kind of ask my final two questions, I just want to remind folks that are joining that if you do have a question for Mike, now's your time to kind of put them in, so that we have the opportunity to weave them into the conversation before we run out of time. So Mike, and you touched upon this earlier. Obviously transportation does not happen in a vacuum, right? It affects other logistics and supply chain processes, and vice versa. Other supply chain processes affect transportation as well. And a classic example is warehousing, right? For many years, we've heard about the benefits of integrating a TMS with a WMS. Are companies actually doing this though? I mean, that's always been my question. If so, what kind of benefits are they achieving?
Yeah, sure. And this is something that Manhattan sells a lot of warehouse management software, and we also sell a good amount of transportation management software. And organizations that buy us, they're buying into that platform approach, the ability to really generate efficiencies by integrating warehouse management and transportation management. And the other one, Adrian, is don't forget the yard, right? So when we start talking about, I always kind of think that, I always state that transportation is kind of the water, the warehouse is kind of the ice, and the yard is kind of the slush in the middle, right? It's kind of the touch point between transportation. And as we bring those three things together, along with appointment scheduling, as we bring those items together, I view that as the movement from transportation management to logistics management. The ability to do supply chain execution across all those different, where transportation is cognizant of constraints within the DC. Just some basic things, Adrian, that the people are not doing today. I may be doing my inbound planning into my DC completely ignorant of my labor scheduling in my warehouse. On the outbound side, if I have to split an order across two different trucks, there's going to be a logical way that I need to split those orders. I want to split them so I minimize the pick path of the warehouse. So all of these things start to, and then in terms of the yard, one of the things that we run into at the yard, especially with going back to the capacity issues, right? So more people now are really looking hard at trailer pools, having their carriers drop trailers in the yard. The ability to integrate yard management with my TMS system, so I understand which carriers have trailers in the yard, what types of trailers are in the yard, and then tender based on that. It's one thing to have a great contract. I can have one guy that can make this move for $1.60 a mile, and it doesn't work if the guy doesn't have, if I cannot execute, right? So the ability to tie all these different aspects together is providing our customers, from my perspective, a real competitive advantage. And again, these are some of the things as you're fighting against Amazon right now. I'm a big retailer and I'm fighting against Amazon. I need to wring every efficiency out. And this myopic approach to transportation being one silo that's ignorant of what's happening on the yard, that's ignorant of what's happening in the warehouse, all of these things are going to drive churn, right? It's kind of the synchronization of those processes, though, are going to drive efficiencies that most people are not able to do right now. Because like we talked about with the proliferation of transportation systems, if you extend that out to all the supply chain execution systems out there, Between you and I, Adrian, we can probably name 50 different providers that are out there right now with this spaghetti patchwork approach. And again, each one is able to solve individual problems, but who's solving the real problem, the real supply chain execution problem? And that's why we spent the last 5 or 6 years really building out this logistics platform to be able to support kind of forward thinking. I'm saying forward thinking, but to support these types of complex supply chains that people really understand the value of.
So is
People really can understand the value.
so is it fair to say? I mean, because I think this discussion. I think on paper, I think it's always been recognized that taking that more holistic view and perspective makes sense or is required. But what I've always found in practice is that companies say, well, we'll let the transportation decisions drive what happens in the warehouse, or vice versa. So even organizationally or even internally, companies have historically thought about it in siloed fashion, right? Well, let's do the transportation, and then whatever transportation comes up with, then warehousing will react to that. Are you seeing companies kind of move away from that in light of everything we just talked about? I mean, obviously you're promoting that because you from a technology standpoint, you're providing that platform to do that. I'm just wondering whether companies are finally moving away from that mentality of saying, well, we'll let the transportation drive what's happening in the warehouse because of these, the ability now that they need to operate more efficiently and smarter to compete in this new environment.
Yeah, I mean, we have companies like the Home Depot, right? This is multi-billion dollars of freight spend, and you just cannot have transportation drive the warehouse. And I think as the decision points raise up, right? So if the VP of transportation is going to be buying a TMS system, we know what he's going to do, right? He will buy the siloed TMS system. But when the decision points start to raise up to the SVP of supply chain, that's where you get this broader view. And oftentimes you were right. So historically, transportation would throw it over the wall to the warehouse, but before that, the buyers threw over their junk over to us, and the customers threw over the junk to transportation. So it was this constant, the stuff rolls downhill. That always was the case. Now people are starting to look at this differently, and they have to, just because of the cost of these inefficiencies are greater than they've ever been before. And when you have these big threats, these big unknown threats out there with these pure play e-commerce companies, that lost inefficiency is meaningful.
Great.
So that there was a lost efficiency.
Yeah, no, great point there, and I agree with that. I mean, I think the time to kind of walk the talk on that has finally come, and I think I'm beginning to see early signs of companies really taking that, finally taking that more holistic view in terms of how to manage their logistics operations. We're just about out of time, Mike, so I'm going to just go ahead to my last question here, and just as a way to wrap up. What questions should shippers ask themselves to assess whether they need to hit that reset button on TFS? What capabilities should they possess, or things that they should be thinking about moving forward?
Yeah. So I mean, if I'm a leader at an organization right now that spends a great deal on transportation, I'm going to be asking myself, am I getting all I can out of my current systems? Are my current systems positioning me to be successful in the future world as we're going up against both Amazon, let's say, as well as retailers that are reacting to the Amazon threat and the innovation. And by the way, I'm a big fan of Amazon. I think that they're bringing a ton of innovation into the space. They're making people think. They're really doing a great job. And some of the stuff, the drones and all that kind of stuff, might be a little bit out there, but it's making people think, and it's making people up their game. So I would ask a transportation professional or a logistics professional, are you getting all you can out of your systems, and are you providing a logistics framework to give your company a competitive advantage?
Right. I guess that is the starting point. So maybe that'll be the question that they ask at their next team meeting, this week. So with that, Mike, thank you very much for your time today. This is most of our conversations are talking logistics. We just end up scratching the surface. And obviously, I do a lot of research, a lot of thinking on TMS, and I plan to do some additional writing on this whole topic. And I think we just had a great start to that conversation today. So thank you very much for making the time to be with us today.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Appreciate it.
And thank you for all of you that joined us live today. And for those of you that are joining us on demand, if you do have a question or a comment for Mike, go ahead and visit the website, talkinglogistics.com, find this episode and post a question or comment there. And I'm sure Mike will be happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you very much for joining, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.